This is your final cheat sheet before you go into your drafts this Labor Day weekend. Welcome into Fantasy Football Today. Dave Richard, along with Katie Mox from Sportsline, Jamie Eisenberg, my colleague for basically 2 decades here at CBS Sports. One of us got the memo on the cool shoes. It's up to you to figure out who is the one that got it. Katie thinks it's her. Listen, we know that this is an important time of year. We know that you want to crush your leagues. You want to feel great about your team. This whole episode is dedicated to it. We're going to go through all the rookies, all the players that changed teams, our breakouts, our busts. But one of the other things that we're going to do is go through the news. And it's so important to stay on top of NFL news, including news that happened on Wednesday in Dallas when Dalvin Cook signed with the Cowboys. Looks like he's going to go to their practice squad. Katie, I know that you were crazy about Rico Dowdle. Jamie, you were too. You guys were taking him early on. Well, I can't say early on, like a mid to late round pick. But now Dalvin's cooked there. Does it change your opinion? Katie, I'll start with you on this Cowboys backfield.
I feel kind of salty that I picked up Rico Dowdle at this point. Now, I don't think it changes necessarily too much because you got 2 old guys there, but I do think he's going to eat into Dowdle's production a little bit once he gets up and running. So I'm not regretting it, but man, I wish I knew this news sooner.
He's still somebody in terms of Dowdle that I want to have on my fantasy roster, but I think the best part about this is that you can get him at a discounted price now because people are going to see this news and see that Dalvin Cook's a part of it, and they're going to say, oh, wow, well, Dalvin Cook is there and Ezekiel Elliott is there, and those 2 guys have a very lengthy resume, and Rico Dowdle does not. I still think that Dowdle, by the end of the season, is going to be the best running back. That being said, you now have another mouth to feed at some point that is going to be a factor, so you don't want to trust Rico Dowdle to be a starter. If he's your 4th running back, your 5th running back, hopefully not your 3rd, 2nd, or 1st, but if he's on your bench, just leave him there. Don't be panicked if you already drafted him. Dalvin is cooked at his age, and Zeke is done as well, so I think we're going to see Rico Dowdle still be the best running back.
Makes me feel slightly better.
Just think about it, though, and this is for you, that Dalvin Cook wasn't on a team for training camp, and maybe he just didn't want to go to training camp, but he never got signed before training camp. So I think Jamie might be right. The league might look at him and say, okay, you've got to be really desperate at running back to go after him. I actually think it's great news for Rico Dowdle. Like you said, you might be able to get him a little bit later in drafts. And I was worried that the Cowboys would make a bigger splash at running back. They still might. But if this is as big of a splash as they're going to make, then this is probably good news for Rico Dowdle.
We had a report a few days ago before this news that they wanted to get Deuce Vaughn on the field more because he has a little bit something different than these other guys have to offer. I don't think that that's a problem for Rico Dowdle either. You know, this is just something that he's never going to be a superstar, but he could still be a flex option for you as the year goes on.
Rico Dowdle kind of drafted in that round 10 range, maybe round 9 earlier before.
But he was getting pushed up into like that round 8 range.
Right,
so
you saw that he was like the 38th running back.
Took him,
Right, but now when in your next draft, you might be able to get him a little bit later.
That's true.
2 running backs that should go ahead of him are both in Carolina, and this is news from yesterday where Jonathan Brooks was put on the NFI list. He's going to miss at least the first 4 games of the season. We know that Jonathan Brooks tore his ACL last year while at Texas. This opens the door, Jamie, for Chuba Hubbard to be the lead running back for Carolina through at least the first 4 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about on yesterday's show as well, I think when you look at this is still a good situation for Jonathan Brooks because you knew there was going to be the chance of him missing time. You knew that there was going to be a chance of Chuba Hubbard being the lead running back to open the season. Now I think people are going to overreact a little bit and maybe draft Chuba Hubbard a little bit too soon and let Jonathan Brooks fall a little bit too far. By the end of the year, the hope is that Jonathan Brooks is the best running back for the Panthers. So if you were drafting either one of these guys to be a starter, unless it was a 0 RB or hero RB approach where you were not taking a running back until the first 6 or 7 rounds, then that's the only reason you should be buying into Chuba Hubbard to be a starter for your team. But there is still the appeal of maybe Brooks does not come back before October, before Halloween, before Thanksgiving. You know, I mean, they're going to be cautious with this. They're building for the future. They're not necessarily building to compete now unless they just get an absolute magical start to their season. So Brooks hopefully will be the guy by the end of the year, Hubbard the beginning part of the year. I would rather, if I just need to stash somebody, I'm stashing Brooks as opposed to Hubbard. But if I need somebody to play right now, I'm clearly taking Hubbard.
Round 8, the range for Brooks. You guys cool with that, or are you going to try and wait a little bit longer?
I would actually look a little bit sooner if I want to guarantee having him, but that's about the sweet spot for him, yes.
Okay, and then Chuba Hubbard, that's one of the running backs I think moves ahead of Rico Dowdle following the Dalvin Cook news, and of course the news in Carolina. Chuba Hubbard, like you said, one of the guys, if you go hero RB build, 0 RB build, these are when you don't take a lot of running backs early on in your draft. you can go and get Chuba Hubbard later on and potentially start him as soon as week 1 against the New Orleans Saints. And there's something similar going on in Cleveland when Nick Chubb, our beloved Nick Chubb in fantasy football, will begin the year on the PUP list. We know about that terrible injury from last year. We all saw it in week 2. Jerome Ford took over after that and wasn't terrible for the Cleveland Browns. And now we know that Jerome Ford will be the lead back for the Browns to begin this season. Katie, how do you feel about Jerome Ford, Nick Chubb, potentially compared to the Panthers running backs, Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard?
I kind of like them actually a little bit better if you're going to handcuff these two guys. Like the Browns obviously reduced Chubb's salary by $4 million, so he's highly incentivized. So even though he's missing some time at the front, he is incentivized to get some stuff done towards the end of the season when he comes back. We look at someone like Jerome Ford. He filled in as RB1 for much of Chubb's absence last season, ended as RB17 overall. And the Browns are a big rushing team, so I think the two of them are going to be a little bit better than, well, the offense in general is better than the Panthers offense. So
I would agree with that, and the offensive line should be better. And Carolina improved their offensive line, but Cleveland's offensive line is certainly better than that. I wonder how much running they'll do without having Nick Chubb, the version of Nick Chubb before, and then they're going to rely on Deshaun Watson. So I'm a little bit more cautious with the Browns. I'll take those Panthers running backs first. You want to break the tie?
The Browns by a mile. I mean, when you talk about what the offense is there for Cleveland, I don't think they want to rely on Deshaun Watson. I mean, there's a reason they kept 4 quarterbacks on the roster, because I think they're concerned for a guy that they paid all this money to and is still dealing with shoulder soreness after having shoulder surgery at the end of last season that's carried over clearly to the start of training camp and into almost the start of the season. So their offense was pretty okay under the circumstances last year to get to the playoffs with Joe Flacco at quarterback, because they relied on Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt to get them there. So I don't think they have a problem leaning on Jerome Ford. We'll see what they do to sort of supplement that now that Deontay Foreman's injury has become a problem, whether they bring him back or they go out and get somebody else. But I hope that they're going to get Nick Chubb back by the second half of the season. The best running back of these guys, when everybody's right, is still Nick Chubb for at least one more year. I think Jonathan Brooks has the chance to obviously supersede him. But for one season, if you tell me right now, everybody's healthy, Nick Chubb would have been a second-round pick in fantasy by a lot. And so hopefully they're just being cautious. They have playoff aspirations. They want to make sure Chubb is right. So if you're looking at it, you're drafting probably right now, for me, it would be Brooks 1, just because, again, I think he's going to be back on the field sooner than Chubb. Then it would be Ford. Toss up between Hubbard and Chubb, again, depending on what you need. If you need somebody sooner, it's Hubbard. If you need somebody later, it's Chubb. But I think it just in terms of the backfield, the offense, everything, I'll trust Kevin Stefanski a little bit more than Dave Canales right now.
All right, let's talk about a running back that isn't going to be taken in the middle rounds. This guy's going to be taken pretty soon. It's Josh Jacobs with the Green Bay Packers. And nothing happened to his spot on the Green Bay Packers, but A.J. Dillon put on season-ending injured reserve. He's not going to play this year. There were reports before that happened that Marshawn Lloyd, their rookie running back, was going to be put on injured reserve. He's actually on the active roster. But in the last 24 hours, there has been a mad rush to get Josh Jacobs on fantasy football rosters that are drafting right now and will be drafting in the week. There was, but it wasn't as big as this. I feel like there's been a push for Josh Jacobs. Now, were you taking Josh Jacobs in round 2, for example, before this news came out, Jamie?
I was starting to put him in that range when Lloyd was dealing with the hamstring injury. So when he started to miss time, that's when I started to, I was a little hesitant before following the NFL draft, despite the fact that they gave Jacobs the contract, because I thought, okay, they were very, very high on Marshawn Lloyd. And they still hopefully will get production on Marshawn Lloyd. But this is tough to trust right now. A rookie who's missed all this time in training camp. Now the guy that they were hoping to be the veteran backup is not going to be there as well. So everything is going to be on Josh Jacobs. Yeah. So yes, now the last couple of days, yes, you could feel comfortable if you want to take him in round 2. But I still think everybody was clamoring to get Josh Jacobs. It wasn't like people were saying, oh, okay, I'm not going to touch him because A.J. Dillon and Marshawn Lloyd were there. They were still clamoring to get him.
I get it. Where do you see Josh Jacobs? Would you take him in round 2, Katie?
I would. And before I was a little bit worried just because what you were saying, it was more of a committee there in Green Bay. But now it seems like he's going to settle into that bell cow role, which he's obviously very familiar with and comfortable in that role. Last year was a little bit shaky. Vegas wasn't great for him. However, in 2022, he was an absolute stud. So I think we get a little bit closer to that. The offensive line situation in Green Bay is promising. Jordan Love does have a lot of receivers that he can throw to here, but I do think there's going to be plenty of goal line work for Jacobs.
I want to take your time to look this up whenever we get a chance, whether it's a break or whatever, because going into your wheelhouse. Has the prop market changed for Jacobs in terms of his rushing number? Yeah. Because that's something I'm curious about, because usually we like to tie props and fantasy advice together, because if Vegas is telling you buy in,
right,
we should be buying in. So whenever you get a chance, look
Yeah.
that up and tell us what the prop market is for Jacobs if it's changed over the last couple of days, because I think it's interesting.
We can definitely talk about that after the commercial break if you've got that number, because Jacobs is a player who changed teams. He's an old face in new place, so we will stop the conversation on Jacobs right there. Here are a couple of other players that were in the news yesterday, including TJ Hawkinson being put on the PUP list, along with a couple of other tight ends, Tyler Higbee being among them. Odell Beckham, not a tight end, but he was put on the PUP list. Keaton Mitchell, remember how excited we were for Keaton Mitchell last year in Baltimore? Well, forget about it now. They added Derrick Henry. Mitchell's going to miss the first 4 games of the season. Very quickly, you guys, let's take a look at the ADP over the first 2 rounds according to CBS. We're just going to put the names on the screen. I want you each to react to one of the screens. Here's the first top 12. Katie, what stands out to you from this list as far as someone, either in a good way or a bad way, where they belong as far as ADP goes?
I think Saquon is a little bit risky at number 6. Obviously, with the Eagles, it's an improved offense overall, but you got someone like Jalen Hurts who had 15 rushing touchdowns last season. No Eagles running back has finished as a top 20 fantasy running back during the 3 years that Hurts has been a starter. And let's be honest here, Saquon is a player in decline. His numbers haven't been that great over the last 2 seasons. He struggles before contact. And there's no Jason Kelsey. I think a lot of people underestimate what he was to this offensive line. So I love Saquon Barkley. I know people think that I'm an Eagles hater, but I struggle with him at number 6 here.
I would take Jonathan Taylor ahead of Saquon Barkley even in full PPR leagues. Let's bring up 13 through 24. Jamie, this one's all you. Does someone not belong on this list?
Don't come after me, Swifties, but it's Travis Kelce. Look, he's been maybe the greatest tight end of all time. Gronk might have a say in that, but Kelsey's been certainly one of the best fantasy tight ends that we've ever had, and the godfather of the position for basically the last 10 years. But you get older, you start to see things change, and he was magical in the playoffs. But they said they were limiting his snap counts to get him there. It was his lowest snap count since his rookie season. So what are they going to do this year, going for a 3-peat when they added all these weapons? Probably limit his snap count again. And there's basically a 10-player difference between him and Sam Laporta. Just wait for Laporta if you want to get one of the top-tier tight ends, or wait for Trey McBride, or wait for Mark Andrews, or even Dalton Kincaid. I think all five of those guys are going to compete to be the number 1 tight end this year. So to take Kelsey in round 2, to me, is just a mistake.
How old is he again, Jamie?
He'll be 35 in October.
So that's an old face for sure. We're not going to talk about him when we come back from commercial, but we will talk about old faces in new places. Get you familiar with the players who've changed teams this offseason. There are a lot of them. You're watching Fantasy Football Today, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Jamie Eisenberg all the way to my right, Katie Mox in between us to keep us separated in case we fight. But I don't think we're going to do much fighting here as we talk about old faces and new places, getting you up to speed with players that have changed teams. And even if you're on top of all of your fantasy football advice, don't worry, we're going to help you out with your league draft prep. And that's what this whole show is about, helping you win your league. I want to start with the running backs, and we're going to start right at the top because there are a lot of big name running backs that changed teams this offseason, starting with Saquon Barkley, who you just talked about, Katie, going too soon in round 1. Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, we talked about him. Jamie, you're cool with him in late round 2. I would be as well. And then Joe Mixon. These are names that fantasy managers have really come to know and love. Is there one guy here that you love better than the rest? Katie, I know for you it's not going to be Saquon.
No.
So from Henry, Jacobs, Mixon, is there one you're targeting in your drafts?
I like Mixon out of these guys here. I think that he should obviously get a ton of work here. When you look at where he was with the Bengals, they were very shotgun heavy. Now he's in more of a West Coast offense, which I think will benefit him. He's got an offensive coordinator who comes from the Shanahan tree, which has been very friendly to running backs. I also think he has a lot of good value in the first couple weeks. If you look at these matchups they've got the Colts and the Bears. They gave up a ton of yardage to running backs last year.
Jamie, who'd you like from the list?
Well, Katie and I are going to fight because I do like Barkley. But I agree with you. Going at 6th overall was just a little too soon.
Yeah.
But back into the first round, early part of the second round, I think that's where he belongs, because even though Kelsey is gone, even though he may be losing a little bit of his production from what we saw early in his career, this is the best environment he's ever going to be in, because this offense is going to, I think, allow him to not necessarily be the focal point. We heard that from our colleague Robert Turbin, who talked about this on our show a few weeks ago, that he was everything defenses were keying on. Understandably so. You weren't worried about Daniel Jones. You weren't worried about Sterling Shepard and the crappy receiving core that they had there. You were focused on stopping Saquon Barkley.
Right.
Now there's Jalen Hurts. There's Devontae Smith. There's A.J. Brown. There's so many weapons in Philadelphia and still a very good offensive line, certainly better than anything that he had for the Giants. So I do think that while the previous running backs in Philadelphia with Miles Sanders and DeAndre Swift, if you sort of marry them together a little bit, Swift had a 40-catch season last year. I think Barkley can do that. Miles Sanders had 11 touchdowns despite the tush push when it first started 3 years ago.
True.
I think we'll see Barkley get 10-plus touchdowns. I think we'll still him north of 40 catches, hopefully north of 50, and maybe a career high in rushing. So I do think Barkley's a first-round pick, just not 6th overall.
Well, I feel like, we're on the same side-ish
Yes.
here. Yeah.
Okay.
We can both
Just
win.
don't kick me with the boots.
I like him as like a top 12, 13 type pick. I don't know if I would put him in top 10 in full PPR, non-PPR, easy first round pick, goes without saying. Here are two of my favorite Josh Jacobs stats. His floor as far as PPR points per game is 14 points. That's been over the course of his career. And then Matt LaFleur, 5 seasons as the head coach in Green Bay, only 16 games has he not had a running back get at least 15 touches. And if you look at Jacobs' numbers when he gets at least 15 touches, it's usually pretty good. It's better than 14 PPR points. And in his breakout year in 2022, which you mentioned, Katie, it was over 20 PPR points per game. I love getting Josh Jacobs. And I like getting Derrick Henry, too. I got him in round 4 in a draft we did recently. I don't think anybody's going to get Derrick Henry in round 4. I'm okay with him, even in full PPR. Late round 2, that Ravens offense is going to be very, very good for him. I've got 3 more running backs to show you. These are also guys who changed teams, and they are definitely old faces. Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift. Now, these are all moves that involve running backs. Jones, we've come to know and love in Green Bay. He finished the playoffs on fire. Tony Pollard, once upon a time, was a breakout candidate. He was my breakout candidate. Did not work out so well for me. And DeAndre Swift, former big-time pick of the Lions. Then he went to Philadelphia. Saquon's got his role. Now he's in Chicago. Jamie, I'll start with you. Is there a running back that stands out from this group of 3?
There is, in the negative. Aaron Jones is being drafted way too soon. So I don't think that fantasy managers should be taking him as a top 20 running back. I don't think they should be taking him in the round 5 range. I just think you're talking about a guy that's 29 years old on an offense led by Sam Darnold, who missed 6 games last year during the regular season due to injury. So he was very productive in the playoffs. Had 5 straight games to end the season, including the playoffs, with 100 yards rushing. You're not getting that production this year. We got reports off season that we're going to see maybe Ty Chandler getting a 50-50 split. That makes me nervous for Aaron Jones. So the same draft that Dave referenced, and I think that's why he got him in round 4, is that running backs fell. Aaron Jones, round 7 or later, perfect. If he falls that far, absolutely you're still taking him. He still has a chance to be a top 20 guy. But if you're drafting him that way, you're setting yourself up for failure. So I would not take him. I would take Pollard over him. I would take Swift over him. I think Aaron Jones is 3rd at best of this group.
I'm going to go with DeAndre Swift here on a more positive realm. I feel like the reports out of him and what we've seen from training camp and the preseason have been really, really good, especially as a receiver. We saw that, what was it, a 42-yard play off a screen against Buffalo in the preseason. I know there's some concerns here when you look at Caleb Williams and how deep his receiver room is. It's like, all right, well, how much are they going to use a running back here? But there is something to be said about, there was a lot of receivers and a lot of depth in the offense in Philadelphia, and he still ate DeAndre Swift there. So I do think he'll have some good production here. He is the number 1 back, and so I do think he's probably good, like mid-round sleeper character.
I don't mind him as a mid-round pick, but I'm worried about people that reach for him in that round 5 range, round 6. I think that's probably what his ADP is right now, is around round 6. And I just don't want to draft him to be my number 2 running back unless I'm skipping the position and going hero RB. We talked about that earlier on in the show. I'm worried about him losing out on touchdowns to Caleb Williams, and I am worried about that passing game taking some work away from him. And as good as he was in Philadelphia last year, it was a tale of 2 halves.
Yeah.
First half of the year was really good. Second half of the season, under 10 PPR points per game.
The entire Eagles offense, though, too.
It kind of is, which might not be such a good thing for Saquon Barkley, unfortunately. I'm going to show just names of some other running backs that changed teams. Zach Moss is going to be the first name that you see. He went from Indianapolis to Cincinnati. You'll see a couple of former Ravens who became Chargers on this list. This is just to let you know about some players that made some moves. Zeke is on that list. We talked about the Cowboys running backs earlier in the show. I don't think I'm speaking out of school by saying none of these guys should be your first 6 or 7 picks on draft day.
One of the best late round picks you can get is another guy that changed teams, and that's Antonio Gibson. I just think you're talking about, he's an injury away from being a featured back, and this is a guy the first 2 years of his career, over 1,000 total yards. He's basically free on draft day. So good late round pick for another guy that changed teams.
I can't stand drafting Patriots, so I don't know if I would agree with Antonio Gibson there.
Just this year, or as like a...
I mean, just this year for sure. And in the case of Gibson, I've kind of been sour on Gibson. But, I mean, how could you go wrong with a late-round dart throw on a guy that has a fumbling problem? Okay, wide receivers now that have changed teams. Let's start with Calvin Ridley. Speaking of guys that have kind of underwhelmed over the last season, couple of seasons if you include the fact that he was suspended for a year, Calvin Ridley is now going to Tennessee. He's going to catch passes from Will Levis. And Stephon Diggs going from Buffalo to Houston. It feels like it's going to be a different role for Stephon Diggs. I'm going to ask each of you, if you could draft one of these players, let's say it's round 6, they both happen to be there, who are you taking and why?
I'm going to take Calvin Ridley. I'm not sold on Stephon Diggs here. Yes, he's got all of the name appeal here. But one, things kind of soured with him in the locker room in Buffalo. And two, there's just a wealth of guys that they have at receiver. Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Robert Woods, even Mixon in the mix here. It's just hard for me to expect that Diggs is going to have the level of a career that he had previously in Houston.
I think it depends on what your fantasy build is and how you're going to approach these two guys. If you need a home run hitter, it's clearly Stephon Diggs, because what he can do when he's right, and the one-year prove-it deal, and still trying to show that he's not the problem in Buffalo, and being attached with a quarterback that's on the rise, who is going to challenge downfield. We saw Josh Allen toward that second half stretch. He was not throwing down the field as much, and that was sort of a big issue because Diggs can make a lot of plays down the field. So I think if you need the better production, you didn't get the receivers that you wanted in your first 5 or 6 rounds, first 4 or 5 rounds, because I think these are going to be round 5, 6 caliber players, then you need Stephon Diggs. If you want a safer floor, it's Calvin Ridley, because like you said, he's going to be the number 1 guy there, presumably, with DeAndre Hopkins dealing with the knee injury. So I think Ridley's a little bit safer. Diggs, to me, though, has a higher ceiling. So if I'm shooting for the stars, I'm shooting for Stephon Diggs over Ridley.
I think Diggs, if they both stay healthy, could have more catches over the course of the season than Calvin Ridley.
Well, he also scores when he gets near the end zone. Ridley does not score.
Yeah, we saw
that was a big issue.
Foot out of bounds, drops the ball.
And even look, Will Levis has had a very good camp. Their last preseason game, he was 7 of 8. You know the throw that he missed? An end zone target to Calvin Ridley.
Yeah. And it was against backups, too. I don't know if I can buy into that. But and if you're going to compare quarterbacks, Diggs easily has the better quarterback. Couple more receivers that changed teams, not quite as popular as Calvin Ridley or Stephon Diggs. Deontay Johnson, Keenan Allen. Look, I like Deontay Johnson better. I think both these guys are going to have similar roles for their teams. Johnson certainly could play in the slot just as much as Keenan Allen, but Johnson should see more targets per game. And that's such a weird thing to say, because Keenan Allen last year, there was a point where he was getting 13 targets per game in LA.
He led the NFL.
The clear number 1 guy for the Chargers, and they were throwing a ton. Now he goes to Chicago. It's a completely different role. It's almost like the same thing that could happen to Stephon Diggs. So I like Deontay Johnson better, and I never thought I'd ever say such a thing. Just names only. Who do you like better, Allen or Johnson?
I like Johnson for all the reasons you just said.
Jamie?
Deontay Johnson didn't go to his city and eat everything.
I don't think that's actually what happened. And as a Chicago guy, I should like Keenan Allen for that, if that is what happened. All right, 3 more wide receivers that changed teams, just to show you what they're all about. Marquise Brown going to Kansas City. If he were healthy, I feel like he wouldn't be going in the round 9-10 range. So that's somebody that you could buy the dip on. Certainly Xavier Worthy's more fun in Kansas City, but Marquise Brown could be a good value. And then these are just names that you know from the past. Jerry Jeudy, Mike Williams. I don't think we really need to spend a lot of time with them.
I'll give you another late round guy.
Give me one more late round guy real quick.
Curtis Samuel. I mean, again, could still be the best receiver
that's another
for the
guy
Buffalo
who's
Bills.
On the dip.
Just dealing with turf toe, which is not fun, but you got a rookie in Keon Coleman and a guy that's never done it before as an alpha, if he's going to be that, in Khalil Shakir. Not that Samuel is going to be an alpha, but he's been with Joe Brady before, so that could be something that matters to that offense and maybe matters to fantasy managers.
You said turf toe is not fun. Have you had turf toe?
No, but I don't want to.
No, I wouldn't want to either.
Katie doesn't want to in her boots.
Hey, look, these are turf toe proof, as far as I'm concerned.
They look fireproof as well.
You could also go on the moon with those things.
Yeah, you can walk on the moon, no turf toe. I could do it all.
Let's show 2 quarterbacks, and this is just for the sake of just showing you the news that's happened, tight ends that have changed teams. Well, Aaron Rodgers didn't really change teams, but he might as well have, because we only saw him for 4 snaps last year. You have to take a dart throw on one of these guys with one of your last picks. Who's it going to be?
For me, it's going to be Kirk Cousins. I'll tell you what I have to think about Aaron Rodgers here a little bit later, but I do think both of these guys are a risk. You got both of them coming off of the same injury, right? And one of them happened a little bit later than the other one. But also, Kirk Cousins has to learn an entirely new scheme. But I do like his chances better, just because it's been a long time since Aaron Rodgers has played.
35 off an Achilles versus 40 off an Achilles. I'll take 35 off an Achilles. And look, they both have very interesting receiving cores.
Yes.
And while Garrett Wilson probably a little bit safer than Drake London, I still think Cousins a little bit safer based on his offensive system. I know Rodgers with Hackett, they have a history together, but give me Zach Robinson and the uncertainty, which I do think is going to be very good in Atlanta. Their schedule's amazing also, so love the setup.
They're in the
One
NFC,
other quarterback.
You got one other one?
Yeah, well, Russell Wilson. I mean, look, he goes to Pittsburgh, and does he have an opportunity? Does he have an opportunity?
So did Justin Fields.
Both of them, yeah. I guess the whole quarterback crew there. Fields would be the much better fantasy quarterback, but the thing that we want to see from Russell Wilson is just get George Pickens involved, maybe Pat Freiermuth as well. But a guy that, clearly on the move, going to be the most likely starter for the Steelers.
The two questions I'm asked about the most when I'm out and about: who are your breakouts and who are your busts? We're each going to give you some names when we come back on Fantasy Football Today.
What? Don't even worry about it.
Okay.
When you need fantasy advice, Jamie's the guy to go to. If you need fantasy advice, he's the guy. But if you need an Uber driver, maybe find somebody else. This is the first time you saw that.
It's the first time I've seen it, and I would just like to be so well known and renowned that I could run into somebody and they're still excited to see me and want my advice.
And we went out for lunch afterwards. It was a very pleasant afternoon. Yeah, good to go.
Your insurance, that's you know what? Your insurance rate should go down for that.
About insurance rates in Florida. Let's hope so.
I can't even talk about the insurance. In my mind, I'm like, how can I get on the Jamie plan?
And speaking of low insurance, it's fantasy, but football today. Fantasy Football Today brought to you by BetMGM, the sports book born in Vegas. It's Katie Mox. It's Jamie Eisenberg, who's going to be in NASCAR sooner than later, and Dave Richard along with you. Hey, breakouts and busts. Let's talk about some of our favorite players that we want to target and some players that we want to avoid. Jamie, I'm going to start with you. 2 players, and only 2 players, that are on your breakout list.
Yeah, Jamison Williams and Jaden Daniels. So, I think the upside for both these guys could be starting fantasy caliber players. Clearly, Jamison has a long way to go. He's been terrible in his first 2 years, not used to the level I think that the Detroit Lions would like to, and this is finally the year that we're going to see it. 64 vacated targets with Josh Reynolds gone. I know they just signed Tim Patrick. I don't think it's going to be a factor. So Williams had a great training camp. I think we're going to see him develop as a receiver, use the full route tree, entering his 3rd season. Great schedule for the Lions. I know you love that, Katie, but Jamison Williams entering year 3 should be great. And Jaden Daniels is a top 10 quarterback for me, actually number 9. I think he could lead all quarterbacks in rushing yards. We saw him as just a stud at LSU, clearly goes without saying. Don't love his weapons to necessarily enhance his game, but we've seen this in a Cliff Kingsbury offense with just really one good wide receiver and some parts and a running quarterback with Kyler Murray. I think Kingsbury, the offense coordinator for the Commanders, will get the best out of Jaden Daniels. He's got a chance to be a superstar.
Katie, who do you like as breakouts?
I'm going to go with Dontavian Wicks and Jackson Smith in Jigba. When I look at Wicks here...
It was my commercial that gave you JSN, right?
First of all, when I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, what is he going to say? What is he gonna say? I'm slightly higher than you are, but I still appreciate it. When it comes to the Packers, obviously, they're pretty deep at receiver, right? You got Watson, you've got Reed, but Wicks did really well. He was really solid last year when both of those guys missed some time towards the end of this season. And who's to say that everybody stays healthy for the entire time? I believe he had 3 of his 4 touchdowns all within that span in the season, even had one in that wild card game versus Dallas. He's a big body. I think he's really good for red zone targets, and I think if he continues to do well on the targets that he does get, then he'll be rewarded to get more. And you look at someone like Jordan Love, who really increased his passing game last season. There could be room for 3 wide receivers in that offense, so I really like him. And then for JSN, I think a lot of fantasy managers think that he was a bit disappointing last year, but I also think that the expectations for him were probably a little bit too high. And you look at him with the OC they had last year, didn't really put him in positions to win. I do think they got Grubb coming in there this year. We saw what he did last year with that trio of receivers that they had in Washington. I really think this could be a good season for him. He might be a wide receiver 2, because I do think that Tyler Lockett is getting a little bit old.
And it's not just last year with Ryan Grubb, it was the year before that at Washington, and then the year before that at Fresno State. Consistent track record of not only leaning on his receivers, but the slot receiver.
Yeah.
And I think they're going to move all those receivers around, but JSN will probably be in the slot the most. And you know what I love about both of you guys? You pick breakouts that I can get in round 8 or later. You're not going to find these guys in the first 5 or 6 rounds. And I'm the idiot that's going to give you breakouts that are in the first 5, maybe 6, maybe 7 rounds. My breakout, Isaiah Pacheco at running back. And we just got the news in to CBS Sports that Isaiah Pacheco has a new teammate. It's Samaje Perine coming from Denver to Kansas City, and Perine is a classic passing downs back. So I wonder if this is going to hurt Pacheco's chances to play on third downs. Not that he was terrible last year when he was losing third down work, but obviously you want a running back, especially when if you're taking him as the 14th player like Pacheco is. Man, that's somebody that you want to have on the field all the time. And then, Katie, you mentioned Dontavian Wicks. I like Jaden Reed as the best wide receiver in Green Bay.
Yeah.
I'm settled on him because I think he's the most versatile. He can run with the ball. He can catch the ball. He can work downfield. Jordan Love has been used to him. I know last year he didn't play a lot for Green Bay, and I think injuries were a factor. He's healthy now. I think we're going to see a lot more of Jaden Reed, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's Green Bay's #1 wide receiver this year. Wouldn't surprise me if Wicks is #2. There's room for both these
Can
guys.
still
We
be a
saw it with
breakout.
Jordan Love.
Just to clarify, you're both like your guy and your guy better than Christian Watson?
I like Reed better than Watson, yes.
Ooh.
Now listen, they both can still be breakouts.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not an
Right,
incorrect answer.
I think there could be room for two guys in Green
exactly.
Bay.
I don't like him better than Watson, no.
Okay, because
Yeah.
Watson's my favorite because if any of them hit, he is going to obliterate the other three, just based on what he does. Those guys, Reed didn't start performing at the level that we saw until Watson was hurt, and the same thing with Wicks. Now, Wicks is free on draft day. So if he breaks out, you're going to be gold because everybody's getting him cheap. Reed and Watson are sort of neck and neck in terms of where they're getting drafted.
Yeah,
Their
they
ADP
are.
is back and forth. I'm taking the one that has the highest ceiling, and by far it's Christian Watson. Again, hopefully he's healthy, fix that hamstring problem. He's going to be a monster.
You're taking Christian Watson, but you're not taking DJ Moore. You're not taking Brandon Ayuk. Those are two guys on your bust list.
Ayuk.
You agree with me on Ayuk, right?
Are you kidding me? Yes.
It's frustrating, and I think that's the biggest thing is like, look, it's easy to sit here and say this now. I've kind of felt this way for a couple of weeks now, and you know, Katie, we talked about this last time we were on the air together. You see the targets that the projections are. Last year it was 114 targets. He may be missing week 1, and Debo's going to get his. You know that Kittle's going to be fine. Obviously McCaffrey's going to do what he does. Ayuk's still going to be a good fantasy receiver, but I just think that people were drafting him in the round 2 range as early as 2 weeks ago. And I just don't understand it. Like for me, he's a round 5 pick at this point. I can understand if you want to buy into him in round 4, just again, if it's a receiver heavy draft, but I just can't expect at this point, contract, no contract, whatever the situation is going to be, he's going to perform as well as he did a year ago. And the same goes for DJ Moore. Unbelievable last year. Finally showed the breakout potential that we've been waiting for. Goes from Carolina to Chicago, and Justin Fields unlocks him. And it's not fair to say that Caleb Williams can't be better than Justin Fields, because he should be. But there's now Keenan Allen. Whatever his weight is still going to be there. Romo Odunze is still going to be there. Huge factor, as we saw in camp. If you're watching Hard Knocks, they love Romo Odunze. Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett. The running back's going to be factors. Caleb's going to run a little bit. Moore's ceiling is just a little bit capped. And so he's the best Bears receiver. Again, round 4, round 5, I'm okay with it. I still see him going round 3. I'm not buying it.
It's too soon to take either of those guys in round 3. Do you have 2 busts for us?
I do. I'm looking at a tight end first in Cleveland with David Njoku, and then I'm also going to take Aaron Rodgers as someone I think is going to be a bust. Looking at Njoku there, yeah, he finished the year well, right? I think he was tight end number 6, but most of that production did not come from Watson. It came from Joe Flacco. When we look at the difference, I believe he had 8.2 points per game, fantasy points per game with Watson, shot up to 12.6 with Flacco. He's going to compete with target share. You got Jerry Jeudy now there. I just don't think that he's going to be someone you want to draft very early. And then Aaron Rodgers, I feel like we've kind of already said everything. He is 40 years old, hasn't played in a long time, coming off an Achilles tear, doesn't exactly have a strong O-line in front of him. And I don't think that the Jets need him to be a superstar. You know, they just need him to be efficient, which they have not had an efficient quarterback in a very, very long time. So he's going to be a good, decent quarterback, but certainly not elite.
I also have a tight end on my bust list. It's Kyle Pitts. And we've seen him now 3 years in the National Football League. 3 years of relative disappointment. His rookie year, he got over 1,000 yards. He didn't have the touchdowns to match. This is a decent opportunity for him because Kirk Cousins is there compared to the other quarterbacks that they had. But I just didn't like seeing him go in round 6. We're starting to see his ADP slide. It's into round 7. That's more of the territory where I guess I'd be okay with it. But I would either much rather have one of the tight ends taken before Kyle Pitts, or I would settle for one of Jake Ferguson or David Njoku. Even though Njoku is on Katie's bust list, I can get him a little bit later on. As for Michael Pittman, I think it's a different ball game for him this year because Anthony Richardson's back under center. We saw him drop by targets per game, 2 targets per game from Richardson to Minshew. Minshew was great for him last year. I'm not sure Richardson's going to be as good. They added Adonai Mitchell. And what are they going to do when they're near the goal line? They're going to run the ball. It's either going to be Richardson or Jonathan Taylor. It's not going to be Michael Pittman. When his ADP was in round 4, I was staying the heck away from that. Now it's getting into round 5. We're getting a little closer to where I would take him, but round 6 is the round where I would take Michael Pittman. Those are our busts, and those are our breakouts to help you get ready for your drafts this weekend. When we come back, it's time to get to know the rookie class, and it is a good rookie class. We've already touched on Jaden Daniels. We've touched on a couple of other players. We're going to get to them all, including Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors. Where should they go in drafts? We'll tell you after the break here on #AskFFT. Back with you here on Fantasy Football Today, brought to you by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. And now it's time to talk about the players whose careers will be born this year in the National Football League, the rookies. And rookies are always fun to draft because we've got optimism for them, and they've got all kinds of upside theoretically, and we'll talk about it.
Your transitions are getting cheesier by the second. I can't wait to hear what you do to end this.
If anybody would know, it would be you. All right, so let's start with the wide receivers who are catching on. I don't know, that wasn't good. Never mind.
That was a good one, actually.
That one stunk. Listen, we all can't be in cool car commercials.
That was a solid dad joke.
I'm going to try and keep going with the cheesiness. All right. These guys are mostly studs. They're all going to get drafted in fantasy leagues. Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas, Keon Coleman, and then we're throwing Brock Bowers in there because he's the only tight end who's a rookie who's worth a darn. And there's a couple of other receivers who could come into the conversation. Jamie, you might bring them up. But Katie, I want to come to you. There's Marvin Harrison. There's Malik Neighbors. These are the two guys that are going to be going in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah.
Where do you feel comfortable taking them? And is it Harrison that you like better than Neighbors?
It is Harrison that I like better than Neighbors, but I think like those 3, Neighbors, Harrison Jr., and then also Odunze are kind of like automatic, I think, for those first 3. So if I'm looking a little bit outside of that, I like Keon Coleman when you look at the rest of the group there, because you look what's happening in Buffalo. There's no Diggs, there's no Gabe Davis. He is a big body. What is he, 6'2", 213 pounds? But maybe he doesn't have the speed as some of these smaller receivers do, but I do think that he's going to get a lot of targets in the red zone. He's a bully after catch, so I think there's a lot of opportunity for him in Buffalo.
Keon Coleman is a lot of fun.
And he's fun.
Yeah, he's definitely fun, and he could lead that team in targets, catches, yards, and touchdowns. Marvin Harrison's being drafted top 15-ish type of a pick. Are you okay with that? Is that too soon for a guy?
No, 100%. You
Okay.
know, when you talk about everything just sort of aligned for him. I mean, the pedigree, his father, he was a stud, 2-time All-American, unanimous All-American at Ohio State. He lands in a situation where they needed an alpha receiver. He clearly has an opportunity to be that. And we've seen Kyler Murray. It was 2020 with DeAndre Hopkins, where it was 17 PPR points per game. I think people would be a little bit disappointed if that's only where he ended up, but that's still going to put him in the range of like wide receiver 10 through 15, which is kind of where he's being drafted right now. So I'm hoping for a little bit more, but he should get fed targets. He should take advantage of this opportunity. He should be an absolute stud. So it feels like it's almost an automatic that if you get past really Garrett Wilson, who's like wide receiver 10, I think Wilson's upside's a little bit better for this year only. Then it's him, it's Puka, it's London, it's Olave, it's Debo, it's all those guys. To me, he's at the top of the list.
I agree with you. And you said a lot of things about Harrison that I think can apply to Malik Neighbors in New York. The volume, the targets, the playmaking ability. He doesn't have a famous dad, and he also does not have a very good quarterback. And that's why I think Malik Neighbors doesn't go anywhere near Marvin Harrison on draft day. We've been taking him pretty consistently in round 3. We've seen drafts where he's going as late as round 6. If you want him, I think round 3 is going to be the absolute earliest point to get him. But make no mistake, the quarterback situation in New York, it's ugly. But he's going to get in the neighborhood, I think, of 9 targets per game. I really think he can have a monster season, just like
You
Malik
missed
Neighbors.
such a good dad joke.
What did I miss?
You said in the neighborhood. Neighborshood.
I totally blew that one. Oh. Okay, what about Odunze? I'll go to you on this one,
Yeah.
Jamie. Katie said that, or I'll ask you real quick. Odunze over Coleman, because you mentioned Coleman.
Yeah, so Odunze over Coleman.
Where
I'm
does
just saying outside of that, I like.
Where does Odunze rank for you among the other wide
This is
receivers?
where fantasy managers struggle. It's not the top 2 because it's going to be Harrison 1, Neighbors 2, and then there's a little bit of a drop-off. And so once you get into really like starting in round 8, it's Odunze, it's Coleman, it's Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy. I think those 4 guys, it used to be Ladd McConkey, but I think people are a little bit scared of him because of Justin Herbert and the foot injury. But it's those 4 guys. And really it's almost like who do you like the best in their situation? Who do you like the best with their quarterback? So Odunze could easily be that guy because why not? He was drafted third of the group, and Caleb Williams with Keenan Allen a little bit struggling. There's an opportunity for him to step forward. With Coleman, it's the opportunity in Buffalo with Josh Allen. You're tying yourself to maybe the best quarterback, not named Patrick Mahomes, and getting a great opportunity. With Worthy, you're tying yourself to the best quarterback, but it's a crowded receiving core. And so when you start to look at all these guys, it's okay, who do I think is going to maybe by the end of the season be the best? For me, it's actually Brian Thomas because I think his opportunity is just so wide open. But if somebody says it's Odunze, it's Coleman, it's Worthy, I have no problem with whoever you think is the third best wide receiver because any of them could be special talents. I just don't think they have the ceiling like the other two guys in terms of Harrison and Neighbors.
Right, but in the case of Brian Thomas Jr., I wonder if he could hit his ceiling without an injury to the other wide receivers on his team. Whereas in Chicago, in Kansas City, we kind of already saw it with Marquise Brown. If one of those guys misses time, the wide receivers in those two respective teams, then the rookies have a chance to really pop off, and that's something that would be very exciting for fantasy.
Real quick, just because you follow the Niners so clear, are we going to see anything from Pearsall by the end of the year?
I think so. I'm pretty high on him. Obviously the injury, but the reason why he gets injured so much is because he puts so much into it. So I think there's going to be something cooked up for him. I'm high on Pearsall.
Jamie, let's talk about the rookie quarterbacks. It's Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels. Those are the two that are going to be drafted in every single league. Bo Nix, we can talk about. Drake May, we can talk about. But those guys are probably more super flex plays. You've made it clear that you like Jaden Daniels at the top of the list, but can you make the case for Caleb Williams as a top 12 fantasy quarterback?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you touched on it earlier with DeAndre Swift. He's going to run a little bit. He's certainly going to have an opportunity by the goal line. We know he's athletic. 400 or 500 yards, I think, is on the table. And then when you get to the receiving core, clearly it's amazing. So while we're a little bit down on Keenan Allen, a little bit, the other two guys are going to certainly make plays, and Allen's going to do his part. It's arguably the best receiving core any rookie quarterback has stepped into in a very long time, maybe ever. So his passing will be on display. His running will be on display. I would take him, no offense, over Purdy. I would take him over Tua. I would take him over Lawrence. I just think there's such a high ceiling here that if he hits, he's going to be fantastic. And he will be the first Bears quarterback to throw for 4,000 yards.
Yeah, I like Caleb Williams over Jaden Daniels, even though I'm very high on Jaden Daniels. And I would take him over Brock Purdy, actually, as well, but really, really high on Caleb for all the reasons you said.
They're going to be fun players to draft and potentially start as soon as week 1, so keep an eye on them. If you want to know more about the rookie running backs or the rookie tight ends, look for our podcast, Fantasy Football Today. Whatever podcast platform you use, we will be there for it, just as we're there for you. Another cheesy dad joke, because we're going to tweets after the break here on Fantasy Football Today. Back on FFT, answering your questions from X. Katie, what do we got?
All right, this is from Julio Pena, New York Knicks for Life 6. If people in my league like to draft 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, 2 DSTs, and 2 kickers, when it's only a onesie type of league, should that push me to draft multiple quarterbacks, tight ends, etc. as well? Jamie?
No, not even close.
All right, moving on. Okay, this is from Joey Story. I drafted 3 Cardinals players in my draft in my Big League Monday. How bad of a mistake was that, Dave?
I think you were going to get great games from Marvin Harrison each week, and then maybe one from McBride or Connor. You should have stopped with your first 2, assuming the first 2 were Harrison and McBride.
All right, this one's from Orlando. 14-team league, full PPR. I can pick my draft position since I won last year. Congratulations. Where do I pick? I prefer hero running back or 0 running back build.
I would, if you want to guarantee yourself one of those top running backs, then maybe go pick 5 or 4, and then you should be good to go.
All right, now from Brian Miller. Who should I keep in my last roster spot on my dynasty team? Quick, one of these guys.
Neither. Cut them both. They're not going to matter. Darius Davis or Davis Allen are not going to be there for your dynasty team. That's it for us on this episode of Fantasy Football Today. Check us out on our Draft-a-thon. Find it on social media to benefit St. Jude Children's Research Hospital.